I woke up before the sun that morning, the way I always had for most of my life. Old habits settled deep in the bones, especially when those habits are built around taking care of other people. The house was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the steady ticking of the clock above the kitchen doorway. I stood there for a moment in the dim hallway, my robe wrapped tightly around me, listening to the silence that had slowly replaced the noise of years gone by. Once, this house woke up differently. There were hurried footsteps on the stairs, doors slamming, and a boy shouting that he couldn't find his school shoes. Jason had never been quiet growing up. Even when he slept, he moved constantly, as if his dreams were full of races he had to win. I used to peek into his room at night just to make sure he was breathing peacefully. Mothers worry about things no one else notices. Now the house belonged to Jason and his wife Claire, though my name was still on the deed. Somewhere along the way, the feeling of ownership had slipped quietly out of my hands. I walked into the kitchen and turned on the small light above the stove, squinting for a moment as the brightness filled the room. The kettle went on the burner the same way it had every morning for decades, a routine so familiar that my hands moved without thinking. When I opened the cabinet to reach for my tea, I hesitated for a moment because the shelf no longer looked the way it used to. 2 months earlier, Claire had decided the kitchen needed to be reorganized. She said the layout was outdated and inefficient, and she spent an entire Saturday afternoon moving everything around. My old glass jars had been replaced with matching labeled containers she ordered online. The spice rack had moved to a different cabinet. Even the coffee mugs were arranged by color now. Claire had smiled the whole time, explaining how much easier cooking would be once the system was in place. I nodded and thanked her for helping, but every time I opened a cabinet after that day, I felt like a guest searching through someone else's kitchen. The kettle began to whistle softly, pulling me back to the present. I poured the hot water into my mug and carried it to the small wooden table near the window. Outside, the sky was slowly turning pale gray as the sun prepared to rise behind the trees. The garden looked different now, too. Along the fence line where my roses once grew, neat rows of white lilies stood in perfect symmetry. Claire planted them last spring, explaining that roses were messy and attracted too many insects. She preferred flowers that looked clean and modern. I didn't argue with her. I simply watched as the last rose bush was pulled from the soil. Those roses had been planted the summer Jason turned 10, after he begged for a dog, and I told him caring for the garden would be enough responsibility. He watered those roses every evening for weeks before he eventually lost interest. I never told Claire that story. Some memories feel too fragile to explain to someone who wasn't there. Upstairs, I heard a door open and close softly, followed by the faint creak of footsteps crossing the hallway. Claire usually woke before Jason during the week. She liked to start her mornings with an online workout video in the living room, something energetic that involved jumping and quick movements. The first time I saw her doing it, I nearly dropped a plate in surprise. She had laughed politely and explained it was part of her routine to stay healthy and focused for work. Now the sound of her exercise music had become another background noise in the house. A few minutes later, she appeared in the kitchen doorway, wearing black leggings and a bright blue sweatshirt. Her hair was tied neatly in a high ponytail, and her face still glowed from the workout. She paused when she noticed me sitting at the table, as if she hadn't expected anyone else to be awake yet. Then she gave a small, polite smile. "Oh, good morning," she said lightly, stepping inside the kitchen. I returned the greeting and lifted my mug slightly. Claire walked over to the refrigerator and pulled out a bottle of green juice before leaning against the counter. The silence between us stretched for a few seconds longer than comfortable. It wasn't the kind of silence filled with anger or hostility. It was quieter than that, more uncertain. The kind of silence where both people sense something unspoken, but choose not to mention it. Claire finally took a sip of her drink and glanced toward the window. "You're up early again," she said casually. I smiled in the gentle way I had learned over the years. "Old habits," I replied. She nodded like she understood, though I suspected she didn't completely. Claire believed in schedules and productivity, in improving every space she entered. I believed in patience, memory, and the quiet rhythm of routines that grow slowly over time. About 20 minutes later, Jason came down the stairs, his footsteps heavier and slower than Claire's had been. His hair stuck up in the back just the way it used to when he was a teenager, and for a brief second the sight made my heart soften with an old familiar affection. He walked into the kitchen rubbing his eyes and yawning. Claire handed him a protein bar without even looking at him, clearly used to the routine by now. "You're running late again," she told him while checking something on her phone. Jason sighed and dropped into the chair across from me at the table. "Morning," he mumbled. I nodded and wished him a good morning in return. He glanced at my mug and then at the clock on the wall. "Mum, you don't have to wake up this early anymore," he said casually. I gave a small shrug. "I've always woken up this early," I replied softly. For a moment the three of us sat there together in the quiet kitchen while morning light slowly brightened the room. Claire talked about her meeting schedule and the errands she planned to run later in the afternoon. Jason listened with half his attention while scrolling through his phone. I watched them both carefully without saying much. From the outside it probably looked like an ordinary family breakfast. There was no shouting, no arguments, no visible tension. But beneath the normal conversation something else had been growing quietly for months. It wasn't loud enough to demand attention. It moved through small moments that most people would overlook. A cabinet moved here, a garden replaced there, a polite pause before someone spoke. None of it seemed important on its own. But when those moments began to collect together, they formed something harder to ignore. That was the strange thing about silent conflicts. They rarely begin with dramatic arguments or angry accusations. Instead, they grow slowly in the spaces between words, building themselves out of small changes that no one openly questions. A different arrangement in the kitchen, a new rule about how things should be done, a look exchanged across the table that lasts just a second too long. At first, you tell yourself it means nothing. Then one day you realize the atmosphere in your own home feels slightly unfamiliar, like the furniture has been rearranged in the dark while you were asleep. I sipped the last of my tea and looked around the kitchen that had once felt entirely mine. Claire was talking about reorganizing the pantry next weekend. Jason nodded absent-mindedly. And in that quiet moment I understood something important. The silent war between a mother and a daughter-in-law rarely starts with open hostility. It begins with territory, memory, and the question of who truly belongs inside the walls of a shared home. Later that morning, the house slowly filled with the ordinary sounds of daily life, but something about the atmosphere felt slightly heavier than usual. Claire moved through the kitchen with confident efficiency, opening drawers and cabinets as if every corner already belonged to her. Jason left in a rush, grabbing his car keys and kissing Claire quickly on the cheek before walking out the door without noticing the look that briefly crossed my face. I had grown used to that too. Children grow into adults, and their attention naturally turns toward their partners, their careers, their own responsibilities. A mother understands that even when it stings a little. Still, there was a difference between growing apart naturally and being quietly pushed to the edges of a life you once held at the center. As the front door closed behind Jason, the house settled into a new silence that felt different from the calm quiet of early morning. Claire began wiping the kitchen counters with slow, deliberate movements. She was the kind of person who cleaned while she thought, organizing spaces the same way she organized ideas in her mind. I watched her for a moment before standing up to rinse my mug in the sink. For years, I had washed dishes here without thinking about it, humming softly while Jason did homework at the table. Now, even that small act felt like something I needed permission for. Claire glanced at me briefly and gave a polite smile that never quite reached her eyes. "You don't have to do that," she said lightly. "I usually take care of the kitchen after breakfast." I nodded and placed the mug in the drying rack anyway. "I've always cleaned my own cup," I replied gently. The moment passed without argument, but the air between us felt tighter somehow. She finished wiping the counter and leaned against it with her arms crossed. "I was actually thinking about making a few more changes around here," she said after a moment, her voice carefully neutral. "Just small updates to make things feel more functional." I waited quietly for her to continue. Claire always presented her ideas as improvements, never as criticisms of what existed before. "The pantry is a little crowded," she added, "and the hallway closet could probably be reorganized too. There are a lot of old things stored there that nobody really uses anymore." I knew what she meant without her saying it directly. Over the years I had saved items that carried memories, Jason's childhood drawings, old photo albums, small boxes of letters from friends long gone. To Claire, they probably looked like clutter. To me, they were pieces of a life that had shaped this house long before she arrived. I kept my voice calm when I responded. Some of those things are important, I said quietly. Claire tilted her head slightly, studying me as if trying to measure the weight of my words. Of course, she replied quickly, but sometimes letting go of things can make space for new beginnings. The sentence sounded rehearsed, like something she had read in a book about personal growth. I nodded slowly, though inside I felt a flicker of resistance that surprised even me. For decades, I had built my life around adapting to whatever Jason needed. Now suddenly, I found myself questioning whether adaptation should always be the answer. Claire turned away from the counter and began opening pantry shelves, already planning the next change in her mind. I watched her quietly, realizing how easily control over a home can shift from one person to another without a single argument ever taking place. The rest of the morning passed in a strange rhythm of polite cooperation and silent observation. Claire worked on her laptop at the dining table while occasionally getting up to adjust something in the kitchen. I sat near the window with a book open in my lap, though I wasn't really reading the pages. My attention drifted between the garden outside and the subtle movements happening inside the house. Every now and then, Claire glanced at me as if she wanted to say something but changed her mind. Perhaps she was trying to figure out how much space she truly had to reshape this place according to her vision. Or perhaps she was wondering how much resistance I might eventually offer. Silent conflicts often begin exactly this way, with both sides quietly measuring the other without openly admitting it. Around noon, Claire closed her laptop and stretched her arms above her head. "I'm going to run a few errands," she announced casually. "Do you need anything while I'm out?" I shook my head and thanked her anyway. She grabbed her purse from the counter and paused near the door before leaving. For a brief second, it looked like she might say something more personal, something that could soften the distance between us. Instead, she simply nodded politely and stepped outside. The door closed with a quiet click, leaving me alone with the stillness of the house once again. I walked slowly through the rooms after she left, noticing the subtle differences that had appeared over the past year. New furniture here, different curtains there, small decorative choices that reflected Claire's taste instead of mine. When I reached the hallway closet, I opened the door and looked at the shelves stacked with boxes and albums. Claire was right about one thing. There were many items stored there that hadn't been touched in years. I pulled down one small box and opened it carefully. Inside were old photographs of Jason as a boy, grinning with missing front teeth, while holding a baseball glove that looked too big for his hands. I ran my fingers gently across the image and felt a wave of memory wash over me. Back then, the future had felt simple. My role in Jason's life had been clear and unquestioned. Now, things were different. He had his own family, his own priorities, and perhaps his own idea of what this house should become. I placed the photograph back into the box and closed the lid slowly. Standing there in the quiet hallway, I realized something that made my chest tighten slightly. The tension between Claire and me wasn't really about cabinets or closets or gardens. Those were only symbols. The deeper issue was something older and more complicated. Claire represented the future Jason was building, a future where my role might gradually shrink until it barely existed. I represented the past that had shaped him, the years of sacrifice and care that built the foundation she now stood on. Neither of us said these things aloud. We didn't argue about them or accuse each other of anything. But the truth lingered in every quiet interaction between us. The silent war had nothing to do with hatred. It had everything to do with belonging, identity, and the unspoken question of whose presence defined this home. When Claire returned later that afternoon with grocery bags in her arms, I helped her carry them into the kitchen without being asked. We moved around each other carefully while putting things away, like two people navigating a narrow hallway without touching shoulders. At one point, our hands reached for the same cabinet door at the same time. We both paused, then stepped back politely to let the other go first. She smiled in that careful way again, the one that suggested friendliness without true warmth. I smiled back with equal politeness. On the surface, nothing seemed wrong. Anyone watching us would see two women cooperating peacefully in the same space. But deep beneath that calm surface, the quiet struggle for place and influence continued to grow stronger with every passing day. The first morning after the confrontation began quietly, but the silence felt heavier than the words that had been spoken the night before. Amina woke before everyone else, just as she had done for years, and moved slowly through the house she still struggled to recognize as her own. The kitchen lights glowed softly while dawn waited outside the windows. She prepared tea with steady hands, though inside her thoughts wandered through memories of easier days. She remembered when Hamza would wake early just to sit with her and talk about his plans for the future. Those mornings had once been filled with laughter and hope. Now the same table felt like a place where invisible walls stood between everyone. Amina set 3 cups of tea on the table instead of 2, unsure if Sarah would come. Even small decisions like this had become complicated. The silence of the house made every movement sound louder than it should have. It was as if the walls themselves were waiting to see what would happen next. Sarah entered the kitchen a few minutes later, surprised to see the tea already prepared. For a brief moment she hesitated near the doorway, unsure if she should step forward or quietly leave again. Amina noticed her reflection in the kitchen window, but did not turn immediately. Instead, she finished arranging the cups and gently placed a plate of bread beside them. When she finally turned around, their eyes met in a cautious way that felt unfamiliar to both of them. Sarah sat down slowly, trying to appear calm even though her mind was still filled with last night's words. Amina poured tea into her cup first, a small gesture of respect she had never stopped practicing. Neither woman spoke right away. The quiet between them carried years of expectations, disappointments, and misunderstandings. Yet beneath that quiet was something fragile, almost hopeful. For the first time in a long while, they were sitting together without Hamza in the room. Sarah finally cleared her throat and thanked Amina for the tea. The words were simple, but they carried more meaning than either of them expected. Amina nodded gently, accepting the gratitude without making it feel like a victory. She had learned that small moments could either heal wounds or deepen them, depending on how they were handled. As they sipped their tea, the tension slowly loosened its grip on the room. Sarah noticed the careful way Amina folded a napkin before placing it beside her plate. It reminded her of her own mother, who had similar habits when guests visited. The thought softened something inside her that had been rigid for weeks. Meanwhile, Amina studied Sarah quietly and saw not an enemy but a young woman trying to build a life in unfamiliar territory. That realization did not erase the pain of the past, but it allowed space for a different perspective. Later that afternoon, Hamza returned home earlier than usual. He stepped inside, expecting the same heavy atmosphere that had filled the house for days. Instead, he found Amina and Sarah working side by side in the living room, organizing old family photographs. The sight surprised him so much that he paused near the doorway. Neither woman noticed him at first. They were quietly discussing where certain pictures should be placed in a new album. Amina explained the stories behind some of the older photos while Sarah listened carefully. When Hamza finally cleared his throat, both women looked up at the same time. The moment felt strange but not uncomfortable. Sarah smiled faintly, and Amina simply greeted her son as she always had. Hamza realized that something subtle had changed in the house. The tension had not disappeared, but it no longer controlled every moment. That evening, the 3 of them sat together for dinner again. The conversation remained cautious, like travelers stepping carefully across an unfamiliar bridge. Hamza asked about Sarah's day at work, and she answered with gentle humor that surprised him. Amina listened quietly, occasionally adding a comment or asking a simple question. The rhythm of the conversation felt fragile but genuine. No one mentioned the arguments from earlier in the week. Instead, they focused on the small details of everyday life. It was not a perfect evening, but it felt like the beginning of something different. The silent war had not completely ended, yet it was slowly losing its power. Each shared moment chipped away at the walls that had once seemed impossible to break. After dinner, Amina stepped outside onto the small balcony attached to the living room. The night air carried a calmness that she had been missing for a long time. Sarah joined her a few minutes later, standing beside her without speaking. They watched the quiet street below where neighbors walked home under the dim glow of streetlights. Finally, Sarah spoke softly, admitting that she had been afraid since the day she moved into the house. She confessed that she always felt as if she was being judged, even when Amina said nothing. Amina listened carefully before responding. She explained that silence sometimes came from uncertainty rather than criticism. For years, she had struggled to understand how her role in the family had changed. Neither woman had known how to talk about those feelings before. Their conversation continued slowly, like two people learning a new language together. Sarah admitted that she often misinterpreted Amina's quiet nature as disapproval. Amina acknowledged that she sometimes expected Sarah to follow traditions without explaining why those traditions mattered to her. As they spoke, both realized that much of their conflict had grown from misunderstandings rather than true hostility. The discovery felt both relieving and painful. It meant that many arguments could have been avoided if they had simply spoken honestly earlier. Yet regret alone could not change the past. What mattered now was the possibility of a different future. Inside the house, Hamza watched them through the glass door of the balcony. He could not hear their words, but he could see the calm expressions on their faces. For the first time in months, he felt hopeful about the family he loved. He realized that he had spent too long trying to choose sides instead of helping them understand each other. The quiet conversation outside seemed to prove that neither woman truly wanted to fight. They'd both been protecting their own fears without realizing how similar those fears were. Hamza stepped away from the door, deciding not to interrupt the moment. When Amina and Sarah returned inside later that night, the atmosphere of the house felt lighter. It was not the joyful energy of the past, but it was peaceful in a new way. They said goodnight to each other before going to their separate rooms. As Amina lay in bed, she thought about how easily silence could turn into distance when people stopped trying to understand one another. Sarah had similar thoughts as she prepared for sleep in the room she shared with Hamza. Both women realized that the silent war between them had never truly been about power or control. It had been about fear, pride, and the difficulty of sharing the same space in each other's hearts. The next morning would bring new challenges, just as every day does. But something important had changed within the house. The silence that once felt like a battlefield had slowly begun to transform into something quieter and more forgiving. Neither Amina nor Sarah expected their relationship to become perfect overnight. Trust would take time, patience, and many more conversations. Yet the possibility of understanding had finally appeared. Sometimes peace does not arrive through dramatic victories or loud apologies. Sometimes it begins with two people sitting together in a quiet kitchen, sharing a simple cup of tea, and deciding that listening might be more powerful than fighting. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the half-open curtains, casting long golden streaks across the living room floor. Amina rose early, as she always did, and moved toward the kitchen to brew her coffee. The familiar aroma filled the room, creating a small sense of comfort amid the tension that still lingered. She glanced at the dining table where Sarah had left her bag the night before, neatly folded with books stacked on top. The sight reminded Amina that this house was no longer just hers, yet it had not been taken from her either. Balance was delicate, but it was achievable. She poured herself a cup and settled into the old armchair near the window, letting the warmth seep through her hands and into her thoughts. Today would be another day of careful observation, measured words, and silent negotiations of space and presence. The house had grown quieter overnight, but the unspoken war was still alive, waiting to see who would make the first move. Sarah entered the kitchen shortly after, carrying a notebook and a pen, a new habit she had started to organize her schedule. "Morning," she said softly, not wanting to disrupt the fragile calm. Amina looked up, offering a small nod in return. There was no tension in her tone, only a quiet acknowledgement. The two women moved around each other in a practiced rhythm, an unspoken understanding that each needed room to exist without stepping on old wounds. Sarah opened the cabinet to retrieve a mug, pausing as she noticed a small photograph taped inside the door. It was of Hamza at age 7, wearing a superhero costume he had insisted on keeping for weeks. She studied the picture for a moment, recognizing a side of the boy she rarely saw in the chaos of their daily lives. "He looks happy here," she murmured. Amina smiled faintly, letting the comment pass without judgment. Memory had a way of softening the edges of conflict if one allowed it to. As the morning unfolded, they found themselves working together on small tasks, folding laundry, arranging books, and tidying shelves. Each action was simple, yet loaded with meaning. The house had become a stage for silent exchanges, each movement a test of patience and adaptability. Amina observed Sarah's attention to detail, noting how she carefully aligned books by height rather than alphabet, and found herself admiring the methodical approach. It was different from her own, but not wrong. Sarah, in turn, noticed the way Amina moved with quiet confidence, how she could handle multiple tasks while remaining calm and observant. For the first time, Sarah realized that she had underestimated the depth of Amina's presence in this home. Respect began to weave itself silently into their interactions, threading a fragile connection that neither had anticipated. Midday brought Hamza back from school, his backpack slung over one shoulder and a tired smile on his face. The moment he stepped inside, the air shifted slightly, no longer heavy but still cautious. He glanced between Amina and Sarah, noting the small, subtle signs of cooperation that had taken root. "Lunch is ready," Sarah announced, placing a plate of sandwiches on the table. Hamza's eyes widened slightly, realizing the effort Sarah had made without comment, without complaint, and without forcing acknowledgement. He had been used to tension that marked every shared meal, but today felt different. They sat together quietly, each absorbed in their own thoughts, yet connected by the simple act of eating at the same table. The unspoken battle paused, allowing for a brief, fragile peace to settle over the room. For Hamza, it was a reminder that family dynamics could shift quietly without dramatic confrontation. After lunch, Amina suggested they take a walk in the small garden behind the house. Sarah hesitated at first, unsure if she was welcome, but the inviting gesture was clear. Together, they stepped onto the worn stone path, the scent of blooming jasmine lingering in the air. Hamza followed closely, his energy bubbling as he examined flowers and small plants with curiosity. Amina moved slowly, touching the leaves and examining the soil, speaking in soft tones to both Sarah and Hamza about which plants thrived best in the sunlight. Sarah listened carefully, occasionally offering her own observations. The garden became a neutral space, free from unspoken judgments and historical grievances. It was in this shared activity, away from the walls of the house, that the silent tension began to transform into subtle understanding. Each step along the stone path was a step toward reconciliation, however quiet it remained. In the afternoon, Amina and Sarah returned inside, settling in the living room with cups of tea. Sarah opened her notebook again, jotting down reminders for upcoming appointments and household tasks. Amina observed silently, noting the deliberate care in Sarah's handwriting, the neatness that reflected a personality seeking order and stability. "You write everything down," Amina commented gently, not as criticism but as recognition. "It helps me keep track of what's important," Sarah replied, a hint of pride in her voice. That simple exchange marked a subtle shift. The room no longer carried the weight of silent judgment, but the beginnings of shared acknowledgement. The act of noticing each other's habits, without critique or competition, was laying the foundation for a quieter, more respectful coexistence. Small observations mattered, more than either woman expected, in the slow evolution of their relationship. Evening came, and the three of them gathered in the living room to watch a television program together. The show was light, filled with humor that elicited quiet chuckles from both Amina and Sarah. Hamza leaned against his grandmother, laughing freely at moments that reminded him of happier days. Amina glanced at Sarah and caught her smiling faintly, the tension that had lingered for months softening in subtle ways. The shared experience of watching something ordinary became extraordinary in its simplicity. Each laugh, each glance, each moment of synchronized attention marked a small victory over the silent war that had once dominated the household. By the time the show ended, the room felt warmer, not just from the soft glow of the television, but from the unspoken connection forming between mother and daughter-in-law. They had not declared truce, but they had taken the first step toward understanding. Later that night, Amina sat alone in the quiet kitchen, her mind reflecting on the day. Sarah had returned to her room, leaving the house calm and undisturbed. The routine tasks of the day, combined with subtle gestures of respect and acknowledgement, had created an unexpected peace. Amina realized that she no longer felt entirely like an intruder in her own home. Her presence was still essential, her history irreplaceable, and her connection to Hamza unwavering. Yet she had learned that coexistence required patience, observation, and the occasional small compromise. The silent war had not ended, but its tone had changed. It was no longer about proving dominance or assigning blame. Instead, it was about understanding, positioning, and quietly asserting presence without confrontation. As she prepared for bed, Amina thought about the future. She knew that each day would bring new challenges and moments of friction, but she also recognized the potential for change. Sarah was not an enemy. She was a young woman learning her place in a house filled with decades of history. Hamza remained the bridge between them, the living reminder of past sacrifices and ongoing responsibilities. Amina felt a sense of cautious optimism, understanding that patience and consistency would eventually yield a more harmonious household. The silent war had shifted subtly into something more strategic, more intentional, and ultimately more promising. Peace, she realized, was not a moment but a process, carefully cultivated through observation, understanding, and quiet resilience. The next morning, Amina woke to the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the soft light spilling through the curtains. She moved slowly through the house, her steps deliberate, almost ceremonial, as if reclaiming the rhythm of a life she had feared slipping away. The silence was no longer oppressive but contemplative, each sound resonating with familiarity. She prepared breakfast methodically, slicing bread, arranging fruit, and brewing coffee. Sarah appeared soon after, carrying a stack of folded laundry, and paused at the doorway. Amina looked up, offering a small nod of acknowledgement, which Sarah returned with the faintest of smiles. Together they moved around the kitchen, coordinating without speaking, their actions quietly communicating a growing mutual respect. Hamza lingered nearby, sensing the change, a subtle shift that made him feel more comfortable in the space they all shared. It was a morning of small victories, each movement a testament to patience and the slow rebuilding of trust. The house, once a battlefield of unspoken resentments, now felt like a fragile sanctuary, brimming with tentative hope and the promise of renewal. By mid-morning, the three of them had settled into a routine that felt unfamiliar, yet comforting. Hamza worked on homework at the dining table, while Amina and Sarah organized old family albums on the couch. The silence between Amina and Sarah was no longer tense. It had transformed into one of quiet focus and understanding. Occasionally, Amina would tell a brief story behind a photograph, sharing memories of family traditions and childhood adventures. Sarah listened attentively, occasionally commenting with interest, the conversation flowing naturally without conflict or judgment. Hamza glanced up from his notebook, a smile tugging at his lips, realizing that the air in the house had shifted. There was no need for mediation or correction. The subtle reconciliation was unfolding organically. Even small gestures, handing over a photo, pointing out a date, sharing a laugh over a forgotten moment, served as reminders that trust could be rebuilt, one action at a time. A sense of normalcy, long absent, began to settle around them, like sunlight creeping steadily into an empty room. Each moment reinforced the fragile peace that had started with simple, deliberate choices. In the afternoon, Amina decided it was time to introduce a small project that could unite them further. She pulled out a large planter box that had been unused for years and placed it on the porch. "We could grow herbs here," she suggested casually, her tone gentle but firm. Sarah's eyes lit up, a spark of enthusiasm breaking through the remaining tension. Hamza jumped in immediately, eager to participate, suggesting they plant basil, rosemary, and thyme first. The project became a shared endeavor, each of them contributing in small ways. Amina prepared the soil, Sarah measured water carefully, and Hamza handled the seeds. As they worked side by side, laughter began to replace the cautious silence. Small mishaps, a spilled cup of soil, a misread seed packet became reasons to joke rather than arguments to fuel. The shared effort fostered teamwork, respect, and connection, transforming the porch into a stage for cooperation rather than confrontation. By the time the last seed was planted, all three stood back, admiring their work, feeling a sense of accomplishment that extended beyond gardening. It was a tangible representation of the new dynamic emerging in the house. Evening arrived quietly, bringing with it the aroma of dinner cooking in the kitchen. Amina and Sarah prepared the meal together, coordinating seamlessly, their actions reflecting a newfound rhythm. Hamza set the table, placing utensils with precision, taking pride in his role. Conversation flowed more freely, light and filled with humor, a stark contrast to previous nights of tension and restraint. Amina shared a story from her youth, and Sarah laughed genuinely, a sound that had been rare in their interactions. Hamza chimed in, contributing his own memories, and the three of them found a temporary equilibrium, a space where differences could exist without conflict. After dinner, they cleared the table together, working in unspoken synchronization. Each act reinforced the slowly rebuilding bonds, demonstrating that cooperation was more powerful than dominance and understanding more enduring than victory. The quiet victories of the day left a lingering warmth in the house, a promise that peace, though delicate, was achievable through patience, empathy, and intentional presence. As they moved through the evening, the household felt less like a place of battle and more like a shared sanctuary. Later that night, Amina sat alone in the living room, reflecting on the day's events. She realized that the silent war had not truly ended, but it had evolved into something more manageable. Conflict had given way to cautious cooperation, and respect had begun to replace resentment. She thought about Sarah, seeing her not as a rival but as a young woman learning the rhythms of a house steeped in history. Hamza's presence served as a bridge, reminding both women of the familial bond that connected them despite past misunderstandings. Amina understood that maintaining this fragile peace would require continued patience, observation, and deliberate choices. She sipped her tea slowly, appreciating the small victories of the day, the shared laughs, the joint efforts, the mutual recognition of each other's presence. The home, once a theater of silent conflict, now held the potential for genuine connection, a space where understanding could grow and mistrust could slowly fade. Amina allowed herself a small, private smile, acknowledging that progress, no matter how slow, was still progress. The following morning, sunlight poured through the kitchen window as Amina prepared breakfast. Sarah entered carrying a notebook, ready to organize her day, and Hamza lingered at the counter, waiting for the familiar smell of brewing coffee to guide him toward the table. The atmosphere was calm but purposeful, filled with a sense of routine that had begun to emerge. Breakfast passed without incident, and conversation flowed naturally, focusing on daily plans rather than past grievances. Small gestures, a hand offered to pour coffee, a shared laugh over a spilled egg, demonstrated the subtle but significant shift in their relationships. The silent war was no longer about asserting dominance. It had become about understanding boundaries and learning to coexist peacefully. Each interaction built upon the last, layering respect, patience, and empathy into a foundation strong enough to withstand future challenges. Amina noted the subtle changes with quiet satisfaction, knowing that true transformation required consistency and care over time. Later that afternoon, Amina suggested a quiet reading hour. Each took a book, sitting together in the living room, the only sounds being the soft rustle of pages turning. Sarah noticed how Amina's eyes lingered on the words with a depth of understanding that came from years of experience. Amina, in turn, observed Sarah's careful attention to each line, the way she paused to reflect before moving on. Hamza read nearby, occasionally glancing up to catch fragments of the conversation sparked by their books. The shared silence was not oppressive but contemplative, each individual contributing to a collective sense of calm. It was an exercise in coexistence, demonstrating that connection did not require constant dialogue or validation. The quiet moments reinforced the bonds being rebuilt through the day, allowing each person to witness the other's presence without judgment or expectation. Small, deliberate actions, repeated over time, had become the building blocks of a more harmonious household. As night fell, the three of them gathered in the living room for a final reflection on the day. Hamza shared a story from school, Sarah added a humorous anecdote, and Amina offered a memory from her own childhood. Laughter and warmth filled the room, replacing the tension that had long dominated their interactions. Each story, each shared experience, was a step toward mutual understanding, allowing old wounds to heal slowly under the light of careful observation and respect. When the evening ended, Amina and Sarah exchanged a quiet nod before heading to their respective rooms. Hamza followed shortly after, a smile of genuine contentment on his face. The house, once defined by silent wars and unspoken resentments, had begun to transform into a home of quiet collaboration, respect, and hope. The slow but steady process of reconciliation marked a turning point, demonstrating that peace could grow from patience, understanding, and shared purpose. The next morning, Amina awoke to the sound of birds chirping outside her window. a gentle reminder that life continued regardless of past conflicts. She stretched slowly, savoring the quiet, and made her way to the kitchen to prepare breakfast. Sarah was already there, setting out plates and cups with a newfound ease that came from routine and familiarity. Hamza wandered in, rubbing his eyes, and grinned when he saw pancakes on the stove, the aroma filling the room like a promise of peace. As they ate, the conversation flowed naturally, touching on schoolwork, household plans, and even small dreams for the weekend ahead. Each word, each gesture, felt intentional, a reinforcement of the subtle trust that had begun to bloom. Amina watched Sarah carefully, noting the way she moved with a quiet confidence, no longer cautious or defensive. Hamza's laughter punctuated the air at intervals, reminding both women of the joy that had been missing for too long. It was a morning of small triumphs, each act of cooperation weaving the household closer together. The past, with its weight and shadows, seemed to lift slightly, replaced by a sense of potential and renewal. By mid-morning, Amina suggested a collaborative project to strengthen their bond further, redecorating the living room. The old furniture, worn and faded, had long needed attention, and the opportunity presented a natural way to work together. Sarah's eyes lit up at the idea, her enthusiasm infectious, while Hamza eagerly offered to move boxes and sweep floors. The three of them worked side by side, planning furniture placement, selecting new colors, and deciding which decorations to keep or discard. Each suggestion was met with consideration rather than dismissal, creating a rhythm of collaboration that had previously seemed impossible. Even minor disagreements over a lamp here, a curtain there, were resolved with compromise, humor, and patience, a testament to the progress they had made. The act of creating a shared space gave each of them a sense of ownership and pride, a tangible result of their cooperation. Laughter and conversation flowed freely, and for the first time in months, the house felt alive in a way that extended beyond mere functionality. By the time the work was done, the living room had transformed into a warm, inviting space, reflecting not only aesthetic choices, but also the growth of their relationships. In the afternoon, they decided to involve the neighborhood children in a small garden project in the backyard. Hamza suggested planting sunflowers along the fence, while Sarah proposed a vegetable patch for herbs and tomatoes. Amina guided the project with gentle authority, ensuring everyone had a role and that the plants were cared for properly. The children eagerly participated, and their laughter and chatter brought a new energy into the house. Sarah worked closely with them, teaching them how to measure soil depth and space seeds evenly, while Amina offered tips from her years of gardening experience. Hamza took responsibility for watering schedules and daily care, feeling proud of his contributions. The shared activity created a sense of community, bridging generational gaps and softening lingering tensions. By the end of the afternoon, the backyard had transformed into a small oasis of greenery, filled with promise and life. The simple act of working together outside fostered cooperation, respect, and trust in ways that words alone could not achieve. Each seed planted represented a small investment in the future, not just of the garden, but of their relationships. As evening approached, the three gathered in the kitchen once again to prepare dinner. This time their coordination was seamless, a dance of movements that reflected the deepening familiarity and mutual respect. Hamza chopped vegetables, Sarah stirred sauces, and Amina oversaw the process, offering guidance only when necessary. The meal became a celebration of their efforts, the act of cooking together transforming into an experience of connection and shared accomplishment. Conversation was lively yet respectful, filled with humor and light teasing, the kind that marked a comfortable coexistence rather than conflict. After dinner, they cleared the table together, chatting about future projects and activities they could enjoy as a family. The air was lighter, the tension that once hung thickly now dissipated, replaced by a sense of collaboration and mutual care. Each evening ended with small rituals, Hamza setting out the dishes for tomorrow, Sarah checking the calendar for appointments, and Amina reflecting on the day with quiet satisfaction. The household had begun to operate as a unit, each member contributing meaningfully while respecting the other's space and roles. Later that night, Amina sat on the porch with a cup of jasmine tea, watching the stars emerge in the clear sky. The silence was not lonely, but restorative, a moment to appreciate the small victories of the day. She thought about the changes in Sarah, the patience and effort she had shown, and the way Hamza had adapted to the new dynamics with curiosity and openness. The house, once a place of silent conflict, had become a space of quiet learning, where each individual understood the importance of respect, cooperation, and deliberate action. Amina allowed herself a moment of reflection, considering the journey from distrust to tentative harmony. She realized that peace required continuous effort, attention, and patience, but the results were worth every struggle. The small rituals, the shared projects, and the gentle acts of kindness had begun to rewrite the story of their home. The past, though never forgotten, no longer dictated the present, allowing room for growth, understanding, and even joy. As she sipped her tea, Amina felt a sense of calm, the knowledge that the silent war had transformed into a quiet partnership built on respect and shared purpose. The following morning brought new energy into the household. Hamza bounded down the stairs, eager to start the day with breakfast, while Sarah prepared her notebook for school assignments, and Amina arranged ingredients for a special pancake breakfast. The interactions were natural, unforced, and imbued with warmth that had once been absent. As they ate, conversation ranged from school projects to weekend plans, each exchange reinforcing their emerging bond. Sarah even suggested a family outing to the nearby park, an idea met with enthusiasm from both Amina and Hamza. The planning process became collaborative, with input from each member valued equally. Small gestures, a smile, a nod, a word of encouragement, punctuated the meal, creating an atmosphere of support and understanding. Hamza's laughter echoed through the house, a sound that had been scarce during previous months of tension. Amina noted the subtle shifts in energy and tone, acknowledging that change had come not through confrontation, but through deliberate, patient action. The household was no longer a battlefield, but a space of growth, learning, and the quiet cultivation of connection. In the afternoon, Amina suggested a family project involving old photographs and mementos stored in the attic. Sarah hesitated initially, unsure of what to expect, but agreed to participate. Together, they ascended the narrow stairs, each step deliberate and careful as they entered the space filled with memories. Boxes of photographs, letters, and keepsakes were brought down and spread across the living room floor. Amina shared stories tied to each item, her voice calm yet filled with emotion. Sarah listened intently, occasionally contributing her own recollections, asking questions and noting details she had never known. Hamza assisted in organizing and categorizing the items, taking pride in the work and learning about his family's history. The activity fostered connection, understanding, and a sense of shared ownership over their family story. It was a bridge between generations, allowing past experiences to inform present relationships. Each photograph, each anecdote, became a thread in a growing tapestry of reconciliation, respect, and mutual appreciation. Evening arrived with the aroma of freshly baked bread and simmering stew filling the house. The dinner table was set meticulously, each plate and utensil arranged with care, a reflection of the attention to detail that now characterized their interactions. Conversation flowed naturally, discussing topics from school to family history, to plans for the garden. Hamza shared stories from his friends, Sarah offered thoughtful reflections, and Amina guided the discussion with gentle prompts, ensuring everyone's voice was heard. Laughter punctuated the air frequently, a sign of comfort and connection that had once seemed impossible. After dinner, they cleared the table together, moving in sync, the shared activity reinforcing their growing unity. Even mundane tasks became opportunities for collaboration, teaching them the value of patience, understanding, and active participation in one another's lives. The once silent war had transformed into a cooperative rhythm where each person contributed meaningfully without overshadowing the others. Later that night, Amina reflected on the day while sitting by the window with a cup of tea. The moonlight illuminated the quiet house, emphasizing the calm that had settled over their home. She considered Sarah's growth, the patience she had demonstrated, and the care she had shown in both the garden and household tasks. Hamza's involvement reinforced the bond between generations, reminding Amina of the importance of nurturing both children and relationships. The transformation of the household was subtle yet profound, a testament to the power of deliberate action, empathy, and patience. Amina allowed herself a deep breath of satisfaction, knowing that the silent war had shifted into a space of learning, growth, and quiet understanding. Each day built upon the last, reinforcing the foundations of respect, cooperation, and connection that would support the family in the years to come. The home, once marked by tension and fear, now held the potential for lasting harmony, rooted in mutual care and attentiveness. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the living room, illuminating the freshly organized furniture and casting warm patterns on the floor. Amina moved through the house with quiet purpose, straightening cushions, checking on the plants, and ensuring everything was in its proper place. Sarah followed closely, helping with small tasks and asking questions about care routines and schedules, showing a genuine interest in learning and contributing. Hamza was at the kitchen counter, sketching ideas for a new garden layout while occasionally offering suggestions about colors and plant types. The atmosphere was calm yet energized, a marked contrast to the tension that had once dominated every corner of the home. As breakfast was served, the three of them shared stories from the previous day's activities, their voices overlapping in laughter and playful debate. Each exchange reinforced the sense of belonging, respect, and shared responsibility that had become the foundation of their household. The small rituals, pouring tea, setting plates, exchanging smiles, created continuity and comfort, teaching them that family harmony was a product of attention, patience, and care. Amina felt a surge of gratitude for the progress they had made, recognizing that healing and trust were ongoing processes rather than single events. The quiet morning was a testament to resilience, deliberate action, and the transformative power of cooperation. After breakfast, Amina proposed a creative project to bring the family closer together, building a small outdoor reading nook in the backyard. Sarah's eyes sparkled with excitement, and Hamza immediately offered to gather materials and help with construction. Together they measured, planned, and designed the nook, discussing details from bench placement to sunshade angles. Amina guided the project, encouraging each person's input while ensuring the overall vision remained cohesive and practical. As they worked, conversations flowed naturally, touching on school, hobbies, memories, and even aspirations for the future. Each moment of collaboration reinforced their respect for one another, allowing small conflicts and misunderstandings to dissolve into shared problem-solving. The physical work created a sense of accomplishment, visible in every plank nailed, every cushion fluffed, and every flower planted nearby. Even minor setbacks, like uneven measurements or stubborn nails, became opportunities for teamwork, patience, and laughter. By late afternoon, the nook was complete, a cozy, inviting space that reflected not only their effort but also the growing harmony in their household. Sitting back to admire their work, Amina felt pride not just in the structure but in the strengthened bonds that had been nurtured alongside it. In the evening, the family gathered around the nook with warm blankets, enjoying tea and pastries as the sun dipped below the horizon. The atmosphere was calm and reflective, with soft conversations about the day's accomplishments and plans for the upcoming week. Hamza shared ideas for adding small solar lights, Sarah suggested seasonal decorations, and Amina offered guidance on maintaining the space sustainably. Their exchange was respectful, with each voice acknowledged and valued, highlighting the evolution of trust and communication that had taken months to develop. The children playing nearby occasionally waved, adding laughter and a sense of community beyond the immediate family. Stories and anecdotes were shared with light humor and gentle lessons, reinforcing the household's evolving culture of collaboration and understanding. Amina observed Sarah's attentiveness and Hamza's thoughtfulness, appreciating how much care each had invested in both the project and the family dynamic. The outdoor nook became more than a structure. It was a symbol of shared effort, patience, and the nurturing of relationships. As darkness fell, the space glowed softly, a visual representation of the warmth and resilience that now defined their home. The day concluded with a sense of quiet fulfillment, a reminder that meaningful change is built through small, consistent acts of cooperation and empathy. The following morning, Amina decided it was time to address lingering tensions with an open discussion around the breakfast table. She carefully framed her words to invite honesty and reflection, encouraging Sarah and Hamza to share their feelings about the recent changes in the household. Sarah spoke first, acknowledging her initial hesitation and the pressure she had felt in navigating her new role within the family. Hamza admitted that he sometimes struggled with divided loyalties, but expressed appreciation for the deliberate efforts to foster understanding. Amina listened attentively, nodding and asking clarifying questions to ensure she fully understood their perspectives. The conversation was challenging yet constructive, revealing vulnerabilities that had previously been hidden behind walls of pride and fear. Each participant acknowledged past misunderstandings, explored their motivations, and identified ways to support one another moving forward. By the time the discussion concluded, a sense of mutual respect and empathy had been reinforced, creating a stronger foundation for future interactions. The act of open communication, combined with patience and active listening, demonstrated that trust could be rebuilt even after conflict. Small gestures, like a shared smile or a supportive touch on the arm, punctuated the dialogue, signaling genuine reconciliation. As they moved on to breakfast, the atmosphere was lighter, infused with optimism, understanding, and a renewed commitment to family cohesion. Mid-morning brought a new opportunity for collaboration, as Amina suggested creating a memory scrapbook that chronicled the household's journey over the past year. Sarah eagerly gathered photographs, notes, and small keepsakes, while Hamza collected drawings and other mementos. Amina oversaw the organization, offering gentle guidance and encouraging creativity while ensuring each contribution was valued. The process became a shared storytelling experience, with anecdotes and reflections sparking conversation and laughter. Each memory shared allowed them to connect across experiences and generations, deepening understanding and appreciation for one another's perspectives. Even minor disagreements over page layouts or decorative choices were navigated with compromise and humor, reinforcing collaborative problem-solving skills. As the scrapbook took shape, the trio reflected on personal growth, challenges overcome, and the evolving household dynamics. The act of documenting their journey created tangible proof of resilience, adaptability, and shared effort. By afternoon, the scrapbook was nearly complete, a visual representation of their strengthened relationships and collective achievements. Sitting together, flipping through the pages, they marveled at the journey they had undertaken, recognizing both the struggles and victories that had defined the past months. It was a moment of pride, reflection, and gratitude, cementing bonds that had once seemed fragile. Later that evening, Amina encouraged a small family celebration to honor their recent accomplishments. She prepared a special meal, drawing from traditional recipes and new dishes that Sarah had helped research. Hamza took responsibility for table settings and small decorations, while Sarah assisted with plating and presentation. The dinner was rich not only in flavor but in symbolic significance, celebrating the collaboration, growth, and understanding that now defined their household. Conversation flowed easily, covering past memories, present achievements, and hopes for the future. Each person expressed gratitude for the other's contributions, acknowledging the effort, patience, and thoughtfulness that had facilitated positive change. The meal concluded with a toast to family, resilience, and the power of deliberate action to transform relationships. After dinner, they cleared the table together, laughing at small mishaps and enjoying the shared effort. The evening's activities reinforced the value of teamwork, empathy, and mutual respect, demonstrating that harmony was an ongoing participatory process. As night fell, Amina reflected on the evolution of her home, appreciating the balance between independence, cooperation, and intentional connection that had been established. The day ended with quiet contentment, a sense of accomplishment, and renewed optimism for the journey ahead. As the week progressed, Amina introduced a series of small challenges and tasks designed to further strengthen bonds and develop trust. Sarah and Hamza were tasked with organizing shared household responsibilities, scheduling activities, and coordinating community projects. Each assignment required careful communication, problem-solving, and flexibility, reinforcing both individual accountability and collaborative effort. Mistakes were addressed with patience and discussion rather than criticism, promoting learning and resilience. As they navigated these challenges, small victories, completing a task efficiently, resolving a disagreement, or supporting one another, were celebrated with recognition and encouragement. Amina observed closely, offering guidance when necessary, but allowing Sarah and Hamza to take the lead in decision-making. This balance of supervision and autonomy fostered confidence, competence, and mutual respect. By the end of the week, the household had developed a rhythm, a predictable yet adaptable structure that supported both productivity and relational growth. The success of these exercises reinforced the importance of intentional effort, thoughtful communication, and active collaboration in building a sustainable, harmonious home. Each day concluded with reflection, conversation, and small rituals that nurtured connection, gratitude, and shared purpose. The following morning, Amina woke early, the sunlight streaming through the kitchen window, highlighting the neatly arranged flowers on the counter. She brewed a fresh pot of tea and placed it on the table, inviting Sarah and Hamza to join her for a quiet start before the day's tasks began. Sarah arrived first, her expression calm and attentive, carrying a notebook filled with plans for a small community project they had discussed earlier. Hamza followed, bringing a basket of fruits he had picked from their backyard garden, the scent of apples and pears filling the room. They settled around the table, each with a cup of steaming tea, and began discussing their goals for the day. Amina emphasized the importance of mindfulness in their work, encouraging the younger pair to focus on intention rather than speed. The conversation flowed naturally, touching on both household plans and broader life lessons, reinforcing the growing sense of connection and understanding. Small gestures, a shared laugh, a gentle nod, an offered slice of fruit highlighted the evolving harmony among them. Even as minor disagreements arose over scheduling, they were resolved with thoughtful compromise, reflecting the patience and respect that now defined their household interactions. By mid-morning, they had already established a productive rhythm, combining diligence with empathy and collaboration. As the day progressed, the family decided to tackle a more ambitious project, renovating the small shed in the backyard into a multifunctional workshop and reading space. Amina guided Sarah and Hamza in clearing debris, measuring spaces, and planning the layout, emphasizing both practicality and aesthetic appeal. Each step required negotiation, planning, and compromise, providing opportunities to strengthen communication skills and reinforce trust. Sarah suggested innovative storage solutions, Hamza offered structural improvements, and Amina ensured their ideas aligned with long-term usability and safety. Laughter and playful teasing punctuated the work, softening moments of frustration and turning them into opportunities for bonding. The physical labor was challenging but rewarding, and the shared effort created a tangible sense of accomplishment. By late afternoon, they had framed the walls and cleared a path for future additions, their progress visible and motivating. Amina reminded them that patience and persistence were key, teaching that meaningful transformation, whether of space or relationships, requires sustained, intentional effort. The sense of pride in their shared creation reinforced confidence, teamwork, and mutual respect. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they stepped back to admire the work, appreciating not just the structure, but the collaboration that had brought it to life. The day concluded with a sense of fulfillment, anticipation, and reinforced familial bonds. That evening, they gathered around the workshop space, candles flickering and soft music playing in the background, creating an atmosphere of reflection and calm. Amina suggested a storytelling session to share experiences, dreams, and lessons learned throughout the week, providing an opportunity to deepen emotional connection and understanding. Sarah spoke about her past struggles and ambitions, sharing insights she had rarely voiced, while Hamza reflected on the challenges of balancing independence with family loyalty. Amina listened attentively, offering guidance, encouragement, and gentle challenges to expand their thinking. Each story revealed layers of vulnerability, resilience, and personal growth, fostering empathy and reinforcing trust. Through this exchange, small misunderstandings from the past were addressed indirectly, replaced by mutual recognition of effort, intention, and care. The storytelling session evolved naturally into brainstorming ideas for future household projects, community involvement, and personal development, blending practical planning with emotional reflection. By the time the candles burned low, they had cultivated both a plan for the future and a renewed sense of closeness. The combination of shared stories, collaborative planning, and open dialogue demonstrated the power of intentional communication and mutual support. As they retired for the night, the sense of connection and purpose lingered, quietly strengthening the foundation of their family life. The next day, Amina proposed a joint garden project to enhance the backyard and encourage environmental stewardship. Sarah researched native plants and beneficial insects, while Hamza created a layout for efficient watering and sunlight exposure. Amina facilitated the project, encouraging observation, learning, and hands-on engagement. As they dug, planted, and mulched, conversations naturally touched on environmental responsibility, life lessons, and shared memories, creating a multi-layered experience of education, bonding, and productivity. Each success, such as a well-planted flowerbed or thriving herb patch, was celebrated, reinforcing teamwork and the sense that each contribution mattered. Even minor mistakes, like plants placed in the wrong spot or soil mishandling, became learning opportunities, addressed with humor, patience, and guidance. Over several hours, the space transformed, and so did their sense of interdependence, accountability, and appreciation for one another's skills. By the afternoon, the garden reflected not only aesthetic beauty, but also the collective effort, cooperation, and love invested into it. Observing the result, Amina felt profound satisfaction knowing that each action contributed to a healthier environment and a stronger family connection. The project served as a microcosm of life. Challenges, collaboration, learning, and growth intertwined to produce enduring results. In the evening, they hosted a small neighborhood gathering to showcase the garden and workshop projects, fostering community engagement and sharing their achievements. Neighbors visited, complimenting the work, asking questions, and expressing admiration for the visible collaboration. Amina, Sarah, and Hamza presented their process, highlighting problem-solving, teamwork, and creative solutions. The interactions strengthened social bonds, enhanced confidence, and provided recognition for the effort invested. During the gathering, they exchanged tips, stories, and experiences with others, deepening the sense of community while reinforcing household collaboration and mutual support. Children played nearby, observing and learning from the structured yet playful environment, reflecting the transmission of values, patience, and resilience. The family navigated conversations with grace, diplomacy, and inclusivity, balancing attention to guests with attentiveness to one another. Each small interaction demonstrated the ripple effect of intentional cooperation, care, and empathy beyond the immediate family. As evening settled, the gathering concluded with warmth, laughter, and the shared sense of accomplishment. The family reflected on the day's success, appreciating both the external recognition and the internal growth, reinforcing lessons about patience, unity, and the value of shared effort. The day ended with quiet reflection, satisfaction, and the anticipation of future collaborative endeavors. The following morning, Amina woke to birds chirping softly outside her window, a gentle reminder of continuity and growth. She brewed jasmine tea and carried it to the porch, where Sarah and Hamza were already planning the final touches for the garden paths and workshop space. Conversation flowed easily, reflecting trust, shared responsibility, and anticipation for the day's tasks. Each suggestion was considered thoughtfully, with compromise and encouragement strengthening their collaboration. As they worked, Amina reflected on the journey from tension to harmony, appreciating the patience, empathy, and deliberate effort that had reshaped their household. Sarah carefully positioned stepping stones while Hamza adjusted lighting for evening ambiance, their skills complementing each other perfectly. Amina oversaw, offering guidance without taking control, allowing them to exercise initiative and creativity. The physical labor and planning fostered a sense of accomplishment, unity, and continuity, with every action symbolizing growth and shared responsibility. By midday, the garden paths were complete, the workshop fully organized, and the atmosphere filled with pride, peace, and satisfaction. They paused, drinking tea and watching sunlight dance through the leaves, a quiet celebration of what they had built together. That afternoon, Amina suggested one final family ritual, a shared journal to document lessons, reflections, and dreams for the future. Sarah and Hamza eagerly contributed, recounting experiences, expressing gratitude, and noting aspirations. Amina guided the process, encouraging honesty, introspection, and recognition of each other's efforts. The journal became a living testament to their journey, challenges faced, victories celebrated, and bonds strengthened. They discussed personal growth, communication strategies, and mutual respect, reinforcing the lessons learned from months of collaboration. Small disagreements over phrasing or organization were resolved with patience, humor, and compromise, further solidifying their trust and problem-solving abilities. Each entry became a reminder of resilience, intentionality, and the power of shared experience. The act of documenting reflections encouraged mindfulness, perspective, and a deep appreciation for the family's evolution. By evening, the journal was complete, a tangible symbol of connection, growth, and unity. Amina felt profound satisfaction, knowing that their efforts had created not only a functional, harmonious household, but also an enduring legacy of care, collaboration, and mutual respect.